"Get that woman off my aircraft right now. She doesn't belong in the forward cabin, and she certainly doesn't belong anywhere near my flight deck." Those were the words spat out with absolute contempt by Captain Victor Hayes, a 59-year-old veteran pilot who wore his authority not as a professional duty, but as a personal crown. It was a crisp, sunlit Tuesday morning at Logan International Airport in Boston, and Gate 42 was buzzing with the familiar, restless energy of passengers boarding Skyline Airways Flight 512 bound for San Francisco. People shuffled down the aisle, carrying rolling suitcases, sipping overpriced coffee, and checking their phones, completely unaware that the woman sitting quietly in seat 14A was about to become the catalyst for the biggest scandal in the airline's 50-year history. Dr. Elena Vance sat by the window, her hands resting folded over a worn leather briefcase tucked neatly under the seat in front of her. At 32 years old, Elena was dressed in a tailored navy blazer and a crisp white shirt, professional, elegant, and deliberately understated. She had spent a decade navigating executive boardrooms and high-stakes engineering hangars where men in high-visibility vests often looked directly past her, assuming she was a secretarial assistant rather than the person who held the technical keys to their entire fleet. What no one on Flight 512 realized, least of all Captain Hayes, was that Elena did not work for Skyline Airways. She was the Lead Fleet Safety Auditor for Vanguard Leasing, the multi-billion-dollar global asset management firm that actually owned 60% of Skyline's commercial aircraft, including the very Airbus A321neo currently sitting at Gate 42. While boarding had slowed near the forward galley, Elena had paused near the main entrance door. As a ground technician prepared to close the primary latching mechanism, her sharp, trained eyes had caught something that instantly made her mental alarms sound. A narrow yellow inspection line, painted across the primary door locking pin to verify alignment, was misaligned by nearly 4 millimeters. To an untrained eye, it looked like a harmless streak of yellow paint. To a senior structural engineer, it was a glaring sign that a critical door component had either been improperly torque-checked or replaced with an unverified revision part. Without causing a scene or uttering a word, Elena pulled out her phone, took a single, crystal-clear, high-resolution photograph of the misaligned lock mechanism, and proceeded calmly to her assigned seat. In 14A, once seated, she opened her tablet and pulled up a confidential technical service bulletin regarding forward door locking assemblies across Vanguard's leased fleet. She zoomed in on her photograph, carefully cross-referencing the visible part number against the engineering schematics displayed on her tablet screen. Her focus was absolute, her face serene and steady. Meanwhile, just a few feet ahead of her in row 3, a white male passenger named Bradley Miller was engaging in behavior that would normally draw immediate security scrutiny. For the past 10 minutes, Bradley had been leaning halfway into the open flight deck, holding his smartphone above the red line marked on the floor, and snapping detailed, high-resolution photographs of the electronic flight display panels and overhead switches. He was laughing loudly, asking the crew intrusive questions about flight control displays, and even asked if the captain would pose for a picture. Sarah Jenkins, the lead flight attendant, didn't show a single second of hesitation. Instead, she smiled warmly, adjusted her uniform jacket, and offered to hold Bradley's phone to capture a picture of him standing right at the threshold of the cockpit. "Just make sure you keep your feet behind the line, sir," Sarah said with a friendly, cheerful laugh. Bradley thanked her enthusiastically, took his phone back, and returned to his seat in row 3, clearly enjoying his special privilege. Moments later, Captain Victor Hayes stepped out of the cockpit to stretch his legs. At nearly 6 feet 2 inches tall, with silvering hair and 34 years of commercial flying under his belt, Hayes carried an overbearing air of unyielding confidence. His eyes swept across the cabin, passing directly over Bradley Miller, who was still actively scrolling through his photos of the flight deck display. Then, Hayes's gaze locked onto seat 14A. He watched Elena enlarge the photograph of the door locking assembly on her phone, while simultaneously reading a complex technical diagram on her tablet screen. He didn't ask her what she was reading. He didn't ask if she worked in aviation. Nor did he ask why she was examining the door mechanism. Instead, his mind filled in every blank through the dark lens of his own deep-seated prejudice. He looked at her braided hair, her calm, composed expression, and the brown leather bag at her feet, and instantly decided that she was an intruder who had no right to be studying his airplane. Hayes turned toward Sarah Jenkins, his jaw clenched tightly. "Is that woman in 14A traveling alone?" he demanded in a low, tight voice. Sarah looked back toward Elena. "As far as I know, Captain. She boarded during the first group. She's documenting the structural interior of my aircraft," Hayes muttered, his voice cold and accusatory. "Look at her. She's studying maintenance schematics. She's too controlled, too calculating." First Officer Brian Cole, a 38-year-old co-pilot sitting inside the flight deck, overheard the exchange and leaned out. Brian was a careful, procedural pilot who immediately felt uncomfortable with the captain's abrupt tone. "Captain, the gentleman in row 3 was taking photos inside the flight deck just 2 minutes ago," Brian pointed out gently. "Sarah even helped him take a photo." Hayes snapped his head around, glaring at his co-pilot with pure condescension. "That's completely different, Brian, and you know it. That man is an aviation enthusiast. He's friendly. He's relaxed. That woman in 14A is calculating. My instincts have kept people safe in the air for over 3 decades, and I know a security threat when I see one. I'm not letting this plane push back until she's off my aircraft." Captain Victor Hayes didn't have the courage to walk down the aisle and address Dr. Elena Vance himself. Instead, he retreated into the safety of his flight deck, hiding behind the weight of his uniform while ordering his crew to carry out his dirty work. He commanded lead flight attendant Sarah Jenkins and ground supervisor Richard Thorpe to march down the aisle and remove the passenger in seat 14A immediately, framing her presence as an unresolved security risk. Richard Thorpe, a mid-level operations supervisor who wore a Navy corporate jacket and an air of bureaucratic arrogance, walked half a step behind Sarah as they reached row 14. They positioned their bodies awkwardly in the narrow aisle, creating an intimidating physical barrier that blocked the path forward and drew the immediate attention of everyone sitting nearby. Elena looked up from her tablet before either of them said a word. She took in the tight, uncomfortable line of Sarah's mouth, the puffed-out chest of Richard Thorpe, and the unmistakable tension radiating from them both. "Dr. Vance," Sarah began, her voice artificially hushed, yet carrying far enough for 3 rows of passengers to hear clearly. "The captain has expressed some concerns regarding your presence on this flight. We need you to gather your personal belongings and step off the aircraft so we can clarify the situation in the terminal." Elena's hands remained perfectly still, resting flat on the edges of her tablet. Her heart beat with steady precision, refusing to give them the dramatic outburst they were clearly expecting. "Concerns based on what specific conduct?" Elena asked, her voice calm, clear, and perfectly modulated. Richard Thorpe stepped forward, towering over her seat with an aggressive posture. "The captain is simply not comfortable with you remaining on board. Flight 512, ma'am. This isn't a discussion." The word comfortable echoed through the quiet cabin. Across the aisle, a man pulled off his noise-canceling headphones to listen. 2 rows behind, a woman pulled out her phone and quietly began recording. Elena met Richard's glare without flinching. "Comfort is a personal emotion, sir. I am asking you a professional question. Have I violated a specific airline regulation, a federal aviation security rule, or a passenger code of conduct?" Sarah's fingers tightened around her digital manifest tablet. "This isn't a debate about policy, Dr. Vance. When the captain issues a command regarding cabin security, we execute it." Elena nodded slowly, taking in the full weight of the situation. She understood the cruel structural trap that had been set for her. If she raised her voice, they would brand her as irrational and aggressive. If she refused to move, they would call airport law enforcement and have her handcuffed for non-compliance. Her power lay not in loud confrontation, but in flawless, undeniable composure. "If I am being removed for a security violation," Elena said, her tone level and unyielding, "I require you to state the exact reason in writing right now, signed by both yourself and Captain Hayes." Richard Thorpe shifted uncomfortably on his feet, his arrogant facade cracking just enough to reveal his panic. "You can discuss paperwork with customer service in the boarding area, We need you off this plane right now so we can close the main cabin door. Will you put in writing that I am being removed because I took a photograph of a misaligned door latching assembly?" Elena pressed, her voice cutting through the silence of the cabin like a surgical blade. "Because before I step off this aircraft, I want it explicitly recorded that I requested to speak with a ground maintenance technician regarding a structural discrepancy on this door." Richard's face hardened. "You need to take your bag and move, ma'am. Now." Elena didn't argue further. She calmly shut down her tablet, slid it carefully into her brown leather briefcase, and pulled her coat from the overhead bin. She didn't hurry, nor did she show a single trace of shame, because she knew she had done absolutely nothing wrong. She stood up, straightened her blazer, and held her briefcase securely at her side. As she stepped into the aisle, Richard Thorpe stepped back abruptly, as if trying to distance himself from a physical threat. Strangers in nearby seats pulled their knees inward, casting suspicious, uncomfortable glances at her as she walked toward the front of the plane. The humiliation was designed to be public, an absolute, a deliberate effort to make an innocent woman feel small in front of 100 onlookers. When Elena reached row 3, her eyes met those of Bradley Miller. Bradley's phone was resting face down on his tray table, his camera roll still filled with photos of the flight deck switches. He looked at Elena, then quickly looked away, staring intently at the floor. He didn't speak up. He didn't mention that the flight attendant had happily taken his picture inside the cockpit just 15 minutes earlier. His silence was the silent tax paid by someone who knew the double standard was protecting him. Elena reached the forward galley and paused at the threshold of the aircraft door. Sarah Jenkins stood by the bulkhead, her cheeks flushed, her eyes avoiding direct eye contact. Elena turned to her, her voice dropping to a quiet, powerful whisper that hit Sarah harder than a physical blow. "Every single unjust action in history survives because people like you convince yourselves that you are simply following orders," Elena said softly. Sarah lowered her head, unable to formulate a single word in response. Elena turned and stepped onto the jet bridge. Through the thick glass of the terminal window, she caught a brief glimpse of Captain Victor Hayes sitting in the left seat of the cockpit. He glanced back at her for a fraction of a second, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips before he reached over and pulled the heavy flight deck door completely shut. Hayes truly believed that by closing that door, he had ended the problem. In reality, he had just locked himself inside a disaster of his own making. The jet bridge smelled of warm jet fuel, rubber tires, and damp terminal air. Elena walked halfway down the carpeted ramp and stopped near the glass window, standing perfectly still as the ambient noise of Logan International Airport surged around her in heavy waves. Luggage carts rattled on the concrete tarmac 3 stories below, jet engines whined in the distance, and overhead speakers echoed with routine boarding announcements for far-off cities. Behind her, Flight 512 remained tethered to the gate, its polished nose pointing toward a runway it had not yet earned the right to use. Elena's hands were remarkably steady, but her breathing was deep and deliberate as she unzipped her coat and pulled out her personal smartphone. She drew one slow, grounding breath, centering her mind, and dialed her mother, Elena Vance. Evelyn answered on the very first ring, her voice carrying the immediate, sharp alertness of a woman who had spent 40 years working as a high-profile civil rights attorney and corporate accountability expert. "Elena, are you on your way to San Francisco?" "No," Elena replied, her voice remarkably clear. "I've just been removed from Flight 512. A brief, heavy pause hung on the line before Evelyn spoke, her tone dropping into a calm, dangerous register. "Did anyone lay hands on you?" "No," Elena said. "They used 2 ground personnel to march me out of seat 14A. They claimed the captain was uncomfortable with me remaining on board." "Did they give you a written citation? Did you demand an official reason?" "I asked 3 separate times," Elena said, looking through the glass window toward Ground Supervisor Richard Thorpe, who was standing near the boarding door talking rapidly into a 2-way radio. "They refused to put anything in writing. They used the phrase, 'suspicious information gathering.'" "And what was the actual trigger?" Evelyn asked, her legal mind already organizing the facts into clear, unyielding categories. "I took a single photograph of the forward left door locking assembly during boarding. Elena explained. The primary yellow torque mark was misaligned by 4 millimeters, and the revision part number didn't match the standard engineering bulletin. I was cross-referencing the image on my tablet when Captain Hayes spotted me. Evelyn's response was immediate and razor-sharp. Listen to me very carefully, Elena. Do not allow your personal outrage to cloud your professional precision. They used an emotional impulse to target you. You will use undeniable evidence to dismantle them. Did you preserve the original image file? It's on my phone right now, Elena confirmed. Do not crop it, Evelyn instructed. Do not edit the file name, do not touch the metadata, and do not run it through any filter. Cloud sync the raw file immediately to 3 separate drives. Write down every name, every title, every quote, and the exact chronological sequence of events while it is fresh in your memory. Human dignity is one legal issue. Fleet structural safety is another. They will try to blur them together to make you look like an angry passenger. We will keep them completely distinct so they cannot escape either one. Elena felt an overwhelming surge of clarity wash over her. The sting of public humiliation evaporated, replaced by a cold, unstoppable sense of purpose. I'm opening the Aero Vanguard executive portal right now. Good, Evelyn said softly. Do not beg them for justice, Elena. Build an evidentiary trap so airtight that they have no choice but to surrender to it. Elena hung up the phone, opened her tablet, and logged directly into the high-priority executive portal for Aero Vanguard Leasing Duty Control. Because Aero Vanguard owned the physical titles to over 2,000 commercial aircraft across 40 international airlines, its senior safety auditors possessed unprecedented authority that far superseded any individual airline's gate agent, operations manager, or star captain. Elena initiated a live emergency voice channel. Within 4 seconds, an executive dispatcher named Martin Shaw picked up the line in Aero Vanguard's global headquarters. Aero Vanguard Duty Control. Shaw speaking. Go ahead, Dr. Vance. Martin, I am filing an immediate owner maintenance hold-on aircraft tail number N512SV, currently sitting at gate 42 inches Boston as Skyline Flight 512, Elena stated, her voice dropping into the precise, rhythmic cadence of a senior auditor. During pre-flight boarding, I conducted a visual observation of the forward left cabin door locking assembly. I identified a 4 millimeter lateral misalignment on the primary yellow torque inspection mark, accompanied by a suspected revision part discrepancy against Fleet Service Bulletin 52-1080. On the other end of the line, the rapid clicking of Martin's mechanical keyboard filled the speaker. Copy that, Dr. Vance. Did you request an on-site physical inspection with local ground maintenance? I requested a maintenance consultation twice before my removal, Elena stated calmly. Ground operations denied my request, declared my observation to be suspicious information gathering, and ordered my physical removal from the cabin under the direction of Captain Victor Hayes. A heavy, stunned silence descended over the dispatch line. They ejected a senior Aero Vanguard fleet auditor for documenting an unverified door lock? Martin asked, his voice filled with sheer disbelief. They didn't bother to check my credentials, Elena replied smoothly. They made an assumption about who I was based on my appearance, refused to answer my questions, and closed the aircraft door. Holding tail number N512SV immediately, Martin said, his keyboard clicking with furious speed. I am issuing an official owner technical hold in the Central Aviation Database. Pushback authorization for Flight 512 is officially canceled pending mandatory structural verification. Elena looked through the jet bridge window. 18 minutes had passed since she had been forced out of her seat. Down on the concrete tarmac, the ground crew had just finished disconnecting the external power cable and were preparing to wave the tug vehicle forward for pushback. Inside the cockpit, Captain Victor Hayes sat back in his leather seat, adjusting his aviator sunglasses and waiting for ground control to clear Flight 512 for departure. Suddenly, a sharp, repetitive chime echoed through the flight deck speakers. The primary flight display flashed bright yellow, accompanied by an automated text alert from Central Dispatch. Pushback authorization revoked. Owner technical hold issued by Aero Vanguard Leasing. Stand by for maintenance inspection. First Officer Brian Cole stared at the screen in complete shock, then turned toward the captain. Captain, pushback. Just got killed. Corporate issued an owner-level structural hold on our tail number. Captain Hayes ripped off his sunglasses, his face flushing crimson, with sudden rage, as he looked out his side window toward the jet bridge glass where Dr. Elena Vance stood quietly holding her phone, watching him with unwavering calm. 5 minutes later, the glass doors of Gate 42 slammed open, and Donald Vance, Skyline Airways Regional Operations Director for the Eastern Seaboard, came striding down the terminal corridor like an angry storm cloud. Donald was a man obsessed with operational metrics, quarterly efficiency scores, and departure time percentages. He was holding his smartphone tightly against his ear, barking orders at a subordinate while sweat glistered on his forehead. Flight 512 was already 22 minutes past its scheduled departure window, and the unexpected technical hold was already cascading through Skyline's tightly packed flight schedule, threatening to delay connecting flights in San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles. Donald ended his call, shoved his phone into his pocket, and marched directly toward Ground Supervisor Richard Thorpe, who was standing near the podium looking panicked. "Who issued an owner hold on my aircraft?" Donald demanded loudly, completely uncaring that dozens of delayed passengers were watching him. "Where is the passenger who filed a fake maintenance report to disrupt my departure schedule?" Richard pointed a trembling finger toward the corner of the gate area, where Elena was sitting quietly on a leather bench, her laptop open on her lap, her leather briefcase resting neatly beside her feet. Donald turned on his heel and walked straight up to her. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He simply leaned down, placing his hands on his hips to physically intimidate her. "Are you the individual who called in an unauthorized safety warning on Flight 512? He snapped, his voice dripping with pure irritation. "Do you have any idea how much money your little stunt is costing this airline every minute that plane sits at the gate?" Elena slowly lifted her head. Her expression held no fear, no anxiety, and no defensive anger. She looked at Donald with the calm, detached authority of a judge watching a chaotic courtroom. "I am the individual who documented an unverified structural discrepancy on an aircraft door lock, yes. And on whose authority do you think you have the right to interfere with a commercial departure?" Donald sneered, crossing his arms. "You're a passenger with a standard ticket. You don't dictate maintenance schedules to Skyline Airways." Without saying a word, Elena reached into the front leather sleeve of her briefcase. She pulled out a sleek, heavy, golden-black executive credential card, encased in clear, protective glass. She held it out steadily, holding it right in front of Donald's face. Donald glanced down at the card, intending to brush it aside, but his eyes locked onto the raised metallic crest at the top. Air Vanguard, Leasing Global, Asset Management. Right beneath the logo, in sharp black lettering, was her photograph, her full name, and her title, Dr. Elena Vance, Lead Fleet Safety Auditor and Structural Risk Assessor. Donald Vance stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked as though he might faint on the airport carpet. His arms uncrossed and dropped limply to his sides, his mouth hanging open in complete helpless shock. Aero Vanguard Leasing was not just an ordinary vendor. They owned 62% of Skyline's entire active narrow-body fleet. More importantly, Donald knew what was happening behind closed doors at corporate headquarters in Chicago. Skyline Airways was currently in the final stages of negotiating a crucial, multi-billion-dollar lease renewal contract with Aero Vanguard, a deal that would determine whether Skyline could even remain in business over the next decade. And the woman standing right in front of him, the woman his team had just marched off a plane under the guise of suspicious behavior, was one of the senior auditors tasked with signing off on that exact fleet contract. Dr. Vance," Donald stammered, his voice suddenly cracking as he held out both hands, begging her to take the credential back gently. I had no idea. Please, allow me to apologize. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding at the gate level." Elena took her credential card back, sliding it smoothly into her jacket pocket. She watched the arrogant director transform into a groveling subordinate in real time, feeling a deep, quiet disgust at how quickly respect arrived once a title was attached to her name. "You didn't have a misunderstanding, Mr. Vance," Elena said, her voice dropping into a register that made Donald shudder. "You had a complete breakdown of basic professional conduct. I made it entirely clear to your ground crew that I was a ticketed passenger who observed a technical flaw. That should have been more than enough to trigger a simple inspection. Instead, your captain decided that my appearance made me a threat." Donald turned toward Richard Thorpe, his eyes wide with desperate rage. "Who authorized her removal? Who told Captain Hayes to issue an ejection order?" "Captain Hayes issued the directive himself, sir," Richard squeaked out, shrinking back against the podium counter. "He said she was taking suspicious notes." Donald turned back to Elena, sweating profusely as he tried to perform immediate damage control. "Dr. Vance, please, let me personally escort you to our private executive lounge. I will personally arrange for a first-class suite on our next flight to San Francisco, fully comped, along with a complete travel voucher package for your entire department. We can resolve this quietly before it reaches corporate." Elena stood up slowly, picking up her briefcase. She looked down at Donald with an expression of absolute moral clarity. "I don't want a private bribe attached to a public humiliation, Mr. Vance," Elena said, her words echoing across the gate area. "Here is what is going to happen. The original removal report filed by your staff will remain completely unedited in your central database. No one touches the wording. Every single second of security video from Gate 42 and the cabin interior will be backed up immediately. Ground maintenance will execute a complete, unhurried physical teardown of that forward door assembly, completely free from the pressure of your departure clock. And you will personally inform every delayed passenger on Flight 512 that this delay was caused by a mandatory structural inspection, not by the passenger you tried to throw away." While the physical maintenance crew was setting up diagnostic ladders outside aircraft N512SV, a far more sinister operation was unfolding inside a locked glass conference room above the operations floor. Donald Vance stood directly behind lead flight attendant Sarah Jenkins, watching over her shoulder as she sat before a corporate laptop, attempting to complete the mandatory incident log required after any passenger ejection. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her original draft was truthful and straightforward. Passenger in 14A was calm, cooperative, and exited the aircraft immediately upon request, after asking for the specific policy basis of her removal. Donald reached down and pointed forcefully at the screen. "Delete that," he commanded, his voice tight with desperation. "That phrasing makes it look like we executed an unlawful removal without cause. Change it to read: Passenger exhibited reluctant compliance and challenging behavior after repeated operational directions from flight crew." Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with anxiety. "Mr. Vance, that isn't what happened at all. She never raised her voice. She never refused to stand up. She just asked why she was being taken off. She didn't move the exact second we asked her to, did she?" Donald snapped back. "Asking questions when a captain issues a command is considered challenging crew authority. Type it exactly the way I told you." Sarah reluctantly erased her original words, replacing them with the distorted text. Donald leaned over the keyboard again, eyeing the section regarding the passenger in row 3, who had been taking photographs of the flight deck displays. In her initial notes, Sarah had included a brief sentence explaining that Bradley Miller had also been taking photos near the cockpit. "Remove every single mention of the male passenger in row 3, Donald ordered flatly. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "He took 7 photos inside the cockpit. If we're claiming Dr. Vance's single photo of a door lock was a security concern, shouldn't the log reflect that another passenger was doing the exact same thing?" "It's not relevant to Captain Hayes' threat assessment," Donald insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If corporate sees that we allowed a white guy to photograph flight controls while kicking an Aero Vanguard auditor off the plane for looking at a door lock, this entire regional office will be fired by nightfall. Erase his name." Sarah deleted the lines, feeling a sick, heavy knot form in her stomach. By the time Donald was finished dictating changes, the official report had transformed Dr. Elena Vance into an aggressive, uncooperative individual who was actively interfering with crew duties, while completely erasing the double standard that had occurred in the forward cabin. What Donald Vance failed to realize was that digital records leave permanent footprints. At 5:12 p.m. that afternoon, an anonymous employee working within Skyline Airways' Central Information Technology Department in Chicago observed the rapid sequence of edits being made to the Flight 512 incident file. Recognizing the blatant corporate fraud taking place, the employee quietly took high-resolution screenshots of the raw file modification log capturing Sarah's original text, Donald's exact computer user ID, the timestamp of every deleted line, and the rewritten paragraphs. The whistleblower uploaded the raw screenshot file directly to an encrypted email server, addressing it to Elena Vance's legal practice in Boston. Attached was a brief, unsigned note. Look beyond Flight 512. Search the internal case management database for reclassified files. Search for how many times racial discrimination complaints were renamed as customer service concerns to protect senior captains. At 5:42 p.m., Elena Vance sat at her desk in Boston, reviewing the whistleblower's leak alongside Elena. Evelyn's eyes flashed with fierce, brilliant focus. Within 30 minutes, Evelyn drafted and transmitted a formal, legally binding evidence preservation demand directly to Skyline Airways Executive Board, their chief legal officer, and the Federal Aviation Administration. The preservation notice was an absolute legal trap. It legally prohibited Skyline Airways from altering, deleting, or archiving a single byte of data related to Flight 512. It demanded the immediate preservation of all raw server logs, keystroke histories, deleted draft revisions, cockpit voice recordings, gate security video, and 6 full years of internal complaint records associated with Captain Victor Hayes. When the legal demand landed in the inbox of Skyline's chief legal counsel in Chicago, panic spread through the executive suite like wildfire. Corporate IT confirmed the terrifying truth. Their central database automatically archived every single revision log, meaning Donald Vance's clumsy attempt to rewrite reality was permanently recorded on company servers, ready to be presented in open court. While executive lawyers in Chicago were hyperventilating over server logs, 27-year-old maintenance technician Daniel Price was crouching beside the forward left door of aircraft N512SV on the tarmac in Boston. Daniel was a careful, precise mechanic who took immense pride in his craft. He held a high-powered inspection flashlight angled directly into the internal housing of the door-locking assembly, comparing the physical serial numbers stamped into the steel against the digital work package on his ruggedized tablet. At first glance, the door mechanism had passed basic mechanical checks. The heavy operating handle moved smoothly, the pressure seals were intact, and no fault lights appeared on the flight deck panels. But as Daniel zoomed in on the physical part number stamped into the locking arm pin, his brow furrowed in confusion. The installed steel component ended in revision code Rev-F. However, Skyline's digital maintenance sign-off log explicitly certified that the door had been upgraded to REVH, a vital structural revision designed to prevent latch slippage during extreme atmospheric pressure changes at high altitude. Daniel immediately pulled up the complete digital sign-off history for aircraft N512SV. What he found made his blood run cold. The secondary sign-off signature, certifying that a senior quality inspector had physically inspected and verified the installation of the Rev-H component, had been entered into the system 3 weeks prior. But according to the timestamp, the inspector's digital credential had been used to approve maintenance sign-offs in Boston, Newark, and Charlotte within a single 45-minute window. It was a physical impossibility. Someone in management had been using shared inspector credentials to rubber stamp unfinished maintenance jobs across multiple airports to keep planes flying without spending the money required for genuine structural upgrades. Daniel stood up immediately, holding his tablet tightly, and walked over to his lead supervisor. "We have a massive certification fraud issue," Daniel said quietly. "This airplane is flying on an outdated door lock that was logged as replaced 3 weeks ago." The discovery spread like an electric current from Boston ground operations directly to Aero Vanguard's global headquarters. Acting with immediate authority, Aero Vanguard issued an emergency lease directive, temporarily grounding all 26 Airbus aircraft in Skyline's fleet that had passed through the same regional maintenance facility. Within hours, over 70 Skyline flights across the country were delayed, canceled, or rerouted as ground crews scrambled to perform physical inspections on every single door assembly. Meanwhile, the executive board of Skyline Airways hired David Lawson, a distinguished, fiercely independent former aviation safety investigator, to conduct an exhaustive internal investigation into the incident at Gate 42. David Lawson did not care about corporate politics, flight schedules, or executive reputations. He set up an office at Chicago headquarters and began pulling the complete, unedited service history of Captain Victor Hayes. What Lawson discovered proved that Flight 512 was not an isolated mistake, but the natural result of an organizational culture that had protected an arrogant bully for decades. 3 years earlier, another commercial flight commanded by Captain Hayes had experienced an intermittent door lock warning light during pre-flight checks in Denver. A young technician named Owen Blake had refused to sign off on the aircraft, demanding a full 2-hour diagnostic cycle according to the official maintenance manual. Captain Hayes had entered the maintenance office in a fury, berating the young technician in front of his peers, demanding that he clear the warning light to protect Hayes's flawless on-time departure metric. When Owen stood his ground, Hayes called regional management. Operations Director Donald Vance intervened, recategorizing the structural fault warning as a harmless indicator glitch. The plane flew without the proper test. 2 weeks later, Owen Blake was quietly removed from the prime daytime line shifts and reassigned to overnight cleaning duties. In a private message recovered by Lawson, Donald Vance had written to a manager, "Owen needs to spend some time on the night shift until he learns to be more flexible when senior captains want to push back on time." David Lawson stared at the recovered messages on his monitor, his expression turning into one of quiet, dark fury. Captain Hayes had spent 34 years treating human safety as an obstacle to his personal metrics, while regional managers actively punished anyone who dared to enforce the rules. The trap had been set years ago. Captain Hayes had simply chosen Dr. Elena Vance to be the person who finally sprung it wide open. 8 weeks after Flight 512 was held at Gate 42, the executive board of Skyline Airways convened a special review hearing inside the main corporate headquarters tower in downtown Chicago. The hearing was held on the 42nd floor, inside a long, windowless boardroom featuring a massive mahogany table, plush leather chairs, and wall-to-wall glass panels overlooking the cloudy Chicago skyline. The room was freezing, filled with the tense, uncomfortable atmosphere of an impending corporate execution. Gathered around the table were Skyline's chief executive officer, the chief legal counsel, the head of human resources, 2 representatives from the Federal Aviation Administration, and senior board members. Sitting on the left side of the table was Dr. Elena Vance, looking breathtakingly poised in a tailored charcoal gray suit, with her mother and legal counsel, Evelyn Vance, sitting right beside her. Sitting across from them was Captain Victor Hayes. For 34 years, Hayes had used his pristine pilot uniform complete with 4 gold epaulets on his shoulders, polished brass buttons, and a starched captain's hat as a psychological shield that commanded immediate obedience from everyone around him. But today, under strict orders from the board, Hayes was dressed in a plain, off-the-rack, dark business suit. Without his gold stripes, he looked surprisingly ordinary, a graying, aging man whose shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of dozens of executive eyes staring at him. Yet, despite his diminished appearance, his jaw remained set in a rigid, stubborn line, desperately clinging to the delusion that his decades of service would save him from consequences. Sitting next to Hayes was Operations Director Donald Vance, who looked visibly ill. Donald's forehead was coated in a fine layer of cold sweat, his tie pulled slightly loose, his hands fidgeting constantly with a pen. The board chair, an elder executive named Arthur Montgomery, tapped his glass with a pen to bring the room to absolute order. "This special review hearing is now officially open," Montgomery announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. We are here to review the events surrounding Flight 512 at Logan International Airport, the subsequent technical grounding of 26 aircraft, and the serious allegations of corporate record falsification. Montgomery turned his gaze directly toward Captain Hayes. Captain Hayes, you have submitted a formal operational statement, claiming that your actions at Gate 42 were executed entirely within the scope of your legal command authority to ensure cabin security. Do you still stand by that assessment today? Hayes straightened his back, attempting to project the deep, booming command voice that had terrified junior flight attendants for decades. I do, Mr. Chairman, Hayes declared firmly. A commercial airline captain cannot wait for a committee vote or a legal consultation when he perceives a potential security anomaly in his cabin. We are required to make high-stakes decisions in real time based on decades of operational experience. I observed a passenger taking unauthorized structural notes and detailed technical photographs near the flight deck. I acted on my professional instinct to protect the safety of my crew and my passengers. A heavy silence lingered in the room. Elena slowly leaned forward, resting her hands flat on the mahogany table. She looked directly across the table into Hayes's eyes, her voice completely calm, devoid of anger, yet packing an immense emotional weight that made several board members lean in to listen. You didn't act on professional instinct, Captain Hayes, Elena said softly, her words slicing through his defense with surgical precision. Instinct is built on observation, facts, and rigorous technical training. You didn't ask me a single question. You didn't look at my credentials. You didn't even have the courage to walk down the aisle and address me face to face. You looked at my appearance. You saw a black woman holding a tablet in the forward cabin, and your deep-seated prejudice instantly decided that I was an intruder who had no right to be there. Hayes's face flushed bright red, his vein bulging on his neck. I have flown over 20,000 hours without a single safety violation, ma'am. I have dedicated my entire adult life to this airline. I do not appreciate having my character questioned by a passenger who created an operational disruption. Elena Vance immediately leaned toward her microphone, her legal voice ringing out like a thunderclap. My client is not merely a passenger, Captain Hayes. She is the Lead Fleet Safety Auditor for the company that owns the airplane you are sitting in. And if you had spent 10 seconds acting like a professional instead of an arrogant bully, you would have realized that her observation saved your flight from taking off with an unverified door lock mechanism. Before Captain Hayes could offer another angry rebuttal, independent investigator David Lawson stood up from the end of the table. Lawson walked over to a high-definition presentation screen mounted on the main wall, holding a remote control. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Lawson announced calmly. Rather than relying on subjective recollections of what occurred at Gate 42, I would like to present the synchronized, multi-angle security and video evidence recovered during this investigation. Lawson pressed a button, and the wall display illuminated, splitting into two distinct, high-definition video feeds labeled Screen A and Screen B. Screen A, Lawson explained, is security footage recovered from the forward cabin area of Flight 512, supplemented by a public video uploaded to social media by passenger Bradley Miller. Screen B is security footage captured from the jet bridge and cabin aisle facing seat 14A. The room watched in absolute breathless silence as the videos began to play side by side. On Screen A, the board watched Bradley Miller, a white male passenger, standing directly at the threshold of the open flight deck. He was holding his phone well past the security line, snapping multiple photos of the primary instrument panels, laughing loudly, and talking to the crew. The video clearly showed lead flight attendant Sarah Jenkins smiling, taking Bradley's phone, and taking a framed photo of him standing right by the cockpit door. Moments later, Captain Hayes was seen stepping out of the flight deck, smiling warmly at Bradley, patting him on the shoulder, and walking right past him without asking a single question. On Screen B, recorded at the exact same time, the board watched Dr. Elena Vance sitting quietly in seat 14A. She was completely silent, her tablet resting on her lap, holding her phone to take a single, non-disruptive photograph of the door latching mechanism beside her seat. The video showed Captain Hayes exiting the flight deck, glaring intensely at Elena from a distance, turning to Sarah Jenkins with an angry expression and retreating into the cockpit. 10 minutes later, Ground Supervisor Richard Thorpe and Sarah were seen confronting Elena, standing over her in an intimidating posture, and marching her off the plane while Elena remained completely motionless and composed. Lawson paused both videos, leaving the two contrasting images frozen on the massive screen. Board member Susan Whitaker, a senior executive sitting near the CEO, turned her head slowly toward Captain Hayes. Her voice was cold, quiet, and filled with profound disdain. Captain Hayes, can you please explain to this board what specific operational behavior made the gentleman on screen A an enthusiast, while making the woman on screen B a security threat? Hayes opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes darted desperately between screen A and screen B. For the first time in 34 years, his booming command voice completely failed him. The undeniable visual evidence laid bare the dark, undeniable truth. There was no security assessment. There was no professional protocol. There was only pure, unvarnished racial prejudice, disguised as captain's authority. The silence in the boardroom stretched out for 10 agonizing seconds, a silence so heavy that the faint hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. Lawson pressed another button on his remote, bringing up a second set of documents. Furthermore, our digital forensic audit of central server logs has confirmed that Regional Operations Director Donald Vance manually altered the official incident report 4 hours after Flight 512 was grounded. He deliberately deleted all mentions of the passenger on screen A, fabricated claims that Dr. Vance was aggressive and non-compliant, and systematically attempted to conceal the operational double standard. Donald Vance buried his face in his hands, slumped over the table, completely broken. Lawson continued, flashing a massive spreadsheet on the screen. Finally, our investigation uncovered 63 historical passenger complaints filed over the past 6 years, alleging discriminatory treatment by Captain Hayes and regional management. In every single instance, internal HR systems reclassified these complaints as customer service concerns, preventing them from ever reaching this board. Concurrently, maintenance logs confirm that Flight 512 was operating with an unverified revision code on its primary door lock, a fault originally identified solely by Dr. Vance. Chief Executive Officer Arthur Montgomery stood up from his chair. His face was rigid, his voice shaking with intense corporate fury as he delivered the board's absolute, unappealable verdict. Captain Victor Hayes, Montgomery declared, looking down at the diminished pilot, your employment with Skyline Airways is terminated effective immediately, for cause, with full forfeiture of all executive pension benefits, for severe misuse of command authority, compromising passenger safety, and bringing catastrophic reputational harm to this airline. Hayes flinched as if shot, his eyes wide with horror as 34 years of status evaporated in a single sentence. Donald Vance, Montgomery continued, turning his wrath toward the trembling director, you are fired immediately for corporate fraud, tampering with official safety records, and gross professional misconduct. Criminal referrals regarding falsified maintenance sign-offs will be forwarded to the Federal Aviation Administration by nightfall. Montgomery turned toward Dr. Elena Vance, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of deep, profound corporate humiliation. Dr. Vance, on behalf of the Board of Directors and the 30,000 employees of Skyline Airways, I offer you our unreserved public apology. Your brilliant engineering oversight saved this airline from a potential mid-air disaster, while your courage has forced a long-overdue cleansing of this company's culture. 3 months after the explosive boardroom hearing in Chicago, the restructuring of Skyline Airways was moving forward at a staggering pace. Captain Victor Hayes and Donald Vance were gone, stripped of their authority and facing federal regulatory investigations. But for Dr. Elena Vance, true victory was never about destroying her enemies. It was about building something enduring that would protect human dignity long after the headlines faded. Utilizing the substantial financial settlement awarded to her by Skyline Airways, alongside matching contributions from Aero Vanguard Leasing, aviation labor unions, and private civil rights donors, Elena and her mother established the Vance Foundation for Aviation Dignity and Safety. The foundation was endowed with an initial $4 million, dedicated to providing advanced technical scholarships for underrepresented flight mechanics, legal defense resources for airline whistleblowers, and comprehensive rehabilitation grants for ground workers injured on the job. Elena served as the primary chair of the Grant Review Board, establishing one absolute unbreakable rule for the foundation. Every single application would be evaluated purely on its objective technical merit, human impact, and professional excellence, completely free from personal favoritism, corporate politics, or emotional prejudice. That foundational rule was put to the ultimate emotional test sooner than anyone expected. Late one Thursday evening, while sitting at her kitchen table in Boston, reviewing the final round of annual grant proposals, Elena opened a file labeled Project Code 884, Ground Operations Rehabilitation Initiative. The proposal was brilliant. It outlined a comprehensive, multi-state occupational therapy and job retraining program designed to assist airline mechanics and baggage handlers recovering from severe physical spinal injuries, allowing them to transition into digital quality inspection roles without losing their livelihoods. The project had the potential to transform the lives of hundreds of injured workers across the aviation sector. Then, Elena looked at the primary author's name, stamped on the title page, Dr. Chloe Hayes, Lead Occupational Therapist. Elena froze, her heart catching in her throat. Chloe Hayes was the 30-year-old daughter of disgraced Captain Victor Hayes. Elena closed the folder slowly, leaning back in her chair, as the quiet hum of her Boston apartment enveloped her. Her mind raced back to Gate 42, to the cold, dismissive glare of Captain Hayes, to the public humiliation of being marched down the aisle, to the years of arrogance that man had displayed before he was finally brought down. The easiest response in the world would be to pick up a red pen, press it into the paper, and reject the application instantly. Nobody on her board would question her. Many would even cheer, viewing the rejection as poetic justice. A daughter paying for the sins of her arrogant father. It would feel emotionally satisfying. It would feel like complete, unbroken revenge. Elena sat in the quiet dark for over an hour, her hands resting on the folder. She thought deeply about what her mother had told her on the jet bridge. Do not use feelings to fight feelings. She realized that if she rejected Chloe Hayes simply because she carried her father's last name, she would be committing the exact same sin that Victor Hayes had committed against her in Seat 14A. She would be looking at a person's identity, making an arrogant assumption about their worth, and denying them fairness based on prejudice. Revenge was easy, cheap, and hollow. True character required something far rarer: absolute, unyielding integrity. Elena opened the folder again. She spent the next 2 hours thoroughly checking every technical reference, verifying Chloe's professional credentials, and analyzing the project's medical feasibility. Chloe Hayes had never defended her father's actions. In fact, public records confirmed that she had actively urged her father to confess during the investigation and had refused to sign a family statement attacking Elena. The proposal met every single objective metric required by the foundation, outscoring every other submission in its category. Elena picked up her pen and signed her name on the approval line. Approved, Dr. Elena Vance, Chair. 2 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at Elena's office in Boston. Dear Dr. Vance. The letter read in neat, elegant script. When I submitted my proposal to your foundation, my colleagues told me I was insane to use my real last name. They said you would see the name Hayes and throw my life's work into the trash. I want you to know that I never agreed with my father's behavior, but I always understood the deep pain he caused you. Your decision to evaluate my work on its own merits required a level of moral grace and professional integrity that my father never possessed. You have taught me and everyone in my family what true dignity actually looks like. Elena read the letter quietly, a soft, serene smile touching her lips. She folded the paper carefully and placed it inside her desk drawer. That evening, in a modest apartment outside Baltimore, retired Captain Victor Hayes sat in an armchair by the window. His flying career was over, his prestige gone, his former colleagues no longer returning his phone calls. His daughter, Chloe, walked into the room and gently handed him Elena's signed approval letter alongside her personal note. Hayes held the paper with trembling, aging hands. He read the signature at the bottom. Dr. Elena Vance. For 34 years, Victor Hayes had believed that power was measured by the gold stripes on a jacket, the ability to command a flight deck, and the authority to throw people away with a single word. But as he stared at the signature of the woman he had tried to humiliate, a single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. In that quiet, broken moment, he finally understood the vast, unbridgeable distance between arbitrary power and true strength of character. 2 years after the grounding of Flight 512, the skies over America operated under a profound, irreversible evolution. Because of the evidence brought forward by Dr. Elena Vance, the Federal Aviation Administration established mandatory, fleet-wide protocols across every major commercial carrier. Arbitrary passenger ejections were strictly outlawed. Any crew member attempting to remove a passenger was now required to complete an independent, audio-recorded ground review with an on-site security director before an order could be executed. Furthermore, digital maintenance systems were permanently upgraded across the industry, utilizing unalterable blockchain technology that made it impossible for regional managers to falsify part revision codes or tamper with incident logs. It was a bright, cloudless autumn afternoon when Dr. Elena Vance walked down the jet bridge at Logan Airport in Boston, embarking on a routine travel trip to San Francisco. She walked with the same quiet, unhurried grace that had carried her through the storm 2 years earlier. She wore her navy blazer, carried her worn brown leather briefcase at her side, and held her standard digital boarding pass in her hand. When she reached the threshold of the aircraft, a young flight attendant greeted her with a genuine warm smile. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Seat 14A is right down on the left." Elena returned the smile, stepped into the quiet cabin, and walked down the aisle. As she settled into seat 14A, she looked out the window at the gleaming wing stretching out toward the runway. In row 3, a young family was taking photos together, laughing happily, while the flight crew moved efficiently through the cabin, treating every single traveler, regardless of their background, appearance, or seat number, with uniform, undeniable respect. There were no shouting matches, no arrogant captains, no panicked managers, and no emergency legal filings. There was only the quiet, smooth rhythm of a commercial aircraft preparing for a safe, honorable flight. Sometimes, the ultimate proof that justice has prevailed isn't found in a roaring courtroom or a dramatic firing. It is found in the quiet, peaceful moments where a fair system simply works the way it was always supposed to. If the story of Dr. Elena Vance and her unwavering fight for human dignity resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you help us continue creating powerful, inspiring stories about justice, courage, and accountability. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's story. Which moment impacted you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments section below, and let us know where you are watching from today. Thank you for watching, for supporting our channel, and for standing up for truth and dignity wherever you are in the world. Until next time, stay courageous and take care.